Hello everybody, I'm Nora Burrows and I love vintage and antique quilts and quilt tops, and I've collected quite a few over the past couple of years. So I want to show you 5 of these quilt tops today. I think they're pretty fantastic, so let's see what we got. Here's the first beauty here. I can't quite fit it all in the screen, but almost. Here's the top right there. I really love this piece. And again, these are quilt tops that I'm showing, but I do want to finish them. And I would finish them in a variety of different ways. Some of them, like this one, I would just do a sandwich. I would just put a piece of batting, backing, bind it up, quilt it and call it a day. But some of them I might do something a little bit different with. But let's start with this one. I love how the blue sashing, not all of the blues are exactly the same. And then those pink cornerstones are super cool. One interesting thing is that if you look at the top, all the blocks in this piece are different, except these two at the top are the same. And it's interesting how this quilt maker didn't spread those out. Typically, I think myself and maybe others would think to balance it and put them, in opposite corners or something like that. But this person wanted to put them right next to each other. I think this is a pretty fantastic block in itself. In terms of dating it, I'm not really sure. I mean, I would say maybe like the 50s, 1950s, 1940s. But let's get a closer look at the fabrics and a closer look at the block itself. One of the things that I really love about this and the fabrics that she used are the stripes. She used a lot of stripes and plaid fabric, and she was very intentional about how she put those pieces together. This is probably my favorite block here with this plaid. This one she did something in a couple places that I absolutely love. Is one of my favorite things when you see in old quilts are these pieces sewn together. They didn't have quite enough fabric to make this a full piece, and this one's not even a straight line. I just think that that's so cool. This is my favorite block because the plaid and the floral together are so unexpected. I would never put those two fabrics together, but for me, it just works. It somehow, aesthetically with the full quilt, is really perfect. I also love this block here with the bow fabric, and what you'll notice about these two is they're not the same block, but it's the same background fabric. And again, she chose to put those two right next to each other instead of spreading them out to create balance. So it's interesting. Let's look at another quilt. This piece here, I'm sure, took a tremendous amount of time. It is sewn onto a muslin background, or backing, I should say. However, again, this is just a top. I'll show the back to you so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. I think that this is probably a 1930s. I do see some feed sacks in some of these strips. It's obviously a strip quilt, very teeny tiny strips. We'll go ahead and measure how big those strips are when we take a closer look. This quilt is very heavy, even without a backing and batting. That's because of the strips sewn onto the muslin. Now, most people, I think, would probably just put a backing on it and not put batting in it because of how heavy it is. But I do love a heavy quilt, so I may put batting inside this quilt and then back it. But let's take a closer look at this quilt. Finished, the strips here are about 1/4 inch or a little bit more, and that is just remarkable to me. I cannot imagine working with such teeny tiny pieces of over such a large space. Many of the fabrics here are repeated in different spots. This gingham shows up quite a bit. There's also this polka dot up here that shows up repeatedly. That adds some theme and variation to the eye, creates good balance. Love this piece. You can see a lot of the feed sacks in here. Let's get a closer look at some of the fabrics. Here you can really see some of these kind of dated prints. This one is particularly popular. I feel like I've seen a couple of these in other quilts. Let's see, what else? Let's get another look. Look at this awesome polka dot. Feels kind of almost retro-y, doesn't it? And you have, these mustardy colors, which are some of my favorites. All right, the backing. Let's take a look at the backing. You can see here that she created each one of those strip blocks individually and then sewed those blocks together. So she created the blocks on the muslin. So you see her sewing lines here. These are not quilted lines. These are just the lines that she used when she hand pieced the strips onto the muslin backing. I also love that not all the backings are the same. We have, you know, this random blue one here, some of the darker brown ones. The backing itself is kind of very artistic in a way. Let's look at quilt number 3. She also, I'm noticing, sewed some of her backing strips together. Just love that. Isn't this quilt spectacular? Really, really visually awesome. I think that this one is also probably from the 1930s. The next two that I'm going to show you after this one are different time periods. One is older and one is a little bit newer. The fabrics used, the block itself, really great. Now the problem with this is that there is damage, not in staining, but in holes. And so unlike the previous two quilts, where I would pretty much put backing, batting, binding, and be done, quilt it, obviously. This one, I might do something a little bit different. There's a couple things that I'm thinking about. One is, and I'll show you a closer look about where some of these holes are. There's quite a bit of holes in the brown, the taupey color, but then there's also some within the fabrics of the stars themselves. So I could replace those fabrics. It's not damaged enough where it would be all that difficult to replace those pieces. Now, I wouldn't be using the exact same fabric, so the browns might be a little bit different and the fabrics in the stars would be different, but that's an option if you really wanted to keep the quilt as is. Though I am more likely, I think, to do something a little bit different and creative with this one. I may cut this quilt apart to make something new, different, original, using old blocks, perhaps combine this with some other antique quilt blocks. Now, I know that is controversial in terms of cutting up quilts, and I am always one to say that I don't like the idea of cutting up quilts. There's not an infinite amount of antique and vintage quilts, and so to cut them up for things like quilt coats and the like, I don't totally support. However, once a quilt is damaged, and this one was not finished, I do think that you can have a little bit more flexibility of adding some new life to it and kind of making it your own. So I may do that with this one. So stay tuned for that. Subscribe so you can see what I do with this quilt. Let's get a closer look at these blocks and the fabrics. So here you can see some of the holes. Now this one, you may be able to just sew it back together, though, that little piece is missing. But some of them farther up here, the fabric is just gone. So you either have to replace these pieces here, or I don't know, do something. So this quilt I find to be really, beautiful the way that it is. And I wish it was in better shape. But maybe I can do something, I can find a way to keep its awesomeness and maybe to add a little extra awesomeness using other blocks from the same period, orphaned blocks, that kind of thing, and do something radical. Now, what that thing would be, I don't know. I would really have to think about it. There is a woman named Mary Kerr. I recently did a workshop with her, and she does have a book out called... let me look, hold on. It is called The Art of Make-Do Quilting. And in this book, she takes antique and vintage blocks and so I just happened to turn to this page, but you can see that this used to be a full quilt top and she kind of cut it up to make a border and used some of the blocks in the middle. These little boys were, antique quilt blocks that she found. So she made kind of this new piece out of these older pieces that had been damaged. So that's what this book is. You kind of go through and she does a variety of that same kind of thing. So anyway, it's possible to make something awesome out of something damaged. Let's look at an older quilt. This quilt here, my best guess is maybe around the 1900s, maybe very late 1800s. Again, this is just a guess. I've looked at a lot of antique and vintage quilts, but no matter how much I look at them, I really kind of always just feel like I don't really know. So comment, maybe you know and you can tell me. And again, we'll take a closer look at some of these fabrics so that you can see a little bit better. But that's my best guess. I love the pink in this. The pink is super cool. This is such an easy quilt to make. It's just the 4-patch alternating with the solid blocks. This is in pretty good shape, so I would probably just do the batting and the backing and the binding and quilt it and love it. I'm noticing there is a little bit of damage to this block here, but I think that that's pretty much the only stain in this piece. So I would have to think about what do you do about that little bit there. I think you just leave it is the answer. It's not something that's going to come out in the wash. You can see that it's not really all that stain-like. It's more like the fabric has been, I don't know, what's the word, like altered by the sun perhaps. Maybe a mixture of stainage and then deteriorated. I don't know. But I don't know what you do with that kind of thing because it's pretty perfect other than that. And the quilt maker, what they did, which is good to note, is when they finished making the quilt, they did a little stitch around the outside of this piece. Now this, I'm noticing the stitch around the edge is machine stitched, and these blocks are hand pieced. So I would guess that maybe someone later realized that this needed to be secured and then took a little stitch around the whole piece, which would be my guess. Look at these fabrics here. Gosh, I love them. Yeah, these right here. Look at this black and white piece paired with the brown and the pink. You have the checkerboard down here. Even some retro-y kind of fabrics. The last one we're going to look at is actually my favorite one, and I really don't know what time period it's from. So let's take a look and maybe you can help me out. Ooh, I'm actually noticing there might be even more. So this is just a little fuzzy, I guess. These are coming apart right here. So that would be an easy fix. You just tuck that in and stitch it up. So it might need a little bit repair, a little more repair than I initially thought, but I think it'll be good. Let's look at that last one. This last one is small enough that I can just lay it right here on my table. Now, we've all seen a million house blocks. At first sight, it's like, okay, another house block, but it's actually a barn. And the shape of this block is super cool. And the construction of this block is more challenging than one would think. I know so because I tried to recreate one of these blocks. And because here, let's look. This is all one piece here. And to connect, to connect these pieces together is challenging because it's not only inset seams, but it's a lot of inset seams. I guess I'll just leave it at that because it's a little complicated to explain. But the design of it, I think, is just so cool. Has this comes down at such an arc, and then you have the silo sticking up. And what's really unexpected is this brown strip at the top. I feel that most house blocks you see, what you would anticipate is more of the background fabric up here. But instead of the background, she was like, let's just put a brown strip up there, which to me, I would think wouldn't make any sense at all. But actually, when looking at the quilt overall, it adds some real visual interest, in my opinion. And then the fabrics are all awesome. Some of them are solids, these pops of yellow here, which come here, as well as this little silo top down here, are unexpected. And then she used some really cool novelty prints. You can see this cow fabric in the door up here. There is American flag appliqued on top of the door down here, as well as flags in the background of this, not the background actually, it's more in the door, the roof, and the silo top. And then obviously I'm just a sucker for a good plaid, and that plaid is just great. So in terms of dating it, parts of me think that it's, from the 60s or 70s, but then pieces like this silo here, this is just one fabric that looks like it's pieced together, but it's not. That reads much more current to me. Same with these flag prints look more current to me. So So I don't know. I don't know what time period it is. In terms of finishing it, I am just gonna put a backing, batting, quilt it, you know, hopefully do something like a cool binding, some sort of stripe. I don't know. I want to do this piece justice. I think it's just so cool and it's in really good shape. In terms of the quilting, what I typically do is if the quilt top is hand pieced, then I will hand quilt it. If it is machine pieced, like this one is machine pieced, then I'll machine quilt it. And the quilting for this type of thing, because I love the fabric so much, I'll probably, you know, just echo the barn, echo the door, echo some of these shapes, and then really let the fabric shine. So I'm not gonna do kind of a pantograph over the whole thing. I'll do this on my domestic machine and just outline the shapes to give it a geometric look. So thank you for joining me. Stay tuned to see, you know, how all these pieces come along. I have other quilt tops I can show you too that I'm excited about. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.